Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Tiffany Landry. I am the Director of Advocacy for the 6th District of the California State PTA. I want to welcome all the PTA members in the audience, as well as educators, families, and community members across the state. I thank you for all the work and volunteerism you do in service of the PTA mission to positively impact the lives of all children and families. 6th District PTA supports PTAs in Santa Clara, Santa Cruz, Monterey, and San Benito counties. The district provides training for PTA officers, assistance to your PTA to successfully run your meetings, and many other programs. A little bit of background for our event tonight. Last year, the delegates at California State PTA Convention adopted a resolution called Teaching Hard History, American Slavery in K-12 Education. That resolution acknowledged that American enslavement is important history, although it is challenging to teach. The resolution encourages PTAs to advocate for the supports teachers need to teach this hard history, things like professional development, classroom materials, and improvements to curriculum. The resolution also encourages PTA members to continue to learn about this history to help us be better advocates. In that spirit of learning, we will be hearing about some history today. The program will touch on the history of enslavement, but since February is Black History Month, we thought it was a good opportunity to broaden the viewpoint, and tonight we are learning about Black intellectual history. There will be time for questions after the presentation. We will collect your questions in the Zoom Q&A feature, so please put your questions there. It helps me to manage the questions and mark them answered after we've read them. The chat is a second way to communicate with the support team in case you have technical issues or need some assistance. The program is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel in the coming weeks. So now we'll get on to the event. I welcome Astrid Granfarley, a student of literature and languages at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. She has a lifelong interest in societies and how they are shaped by history. Welcome, Ms. Granfarley. We appreciate
sorry.
we appreciate this opportunity to learn from you, and I will turn the presentation over to you now.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to get to speak about this, and thank you for inviting me. Well, like she said, my name is Astrid. I'm 18. I'm a student at Edinburgh. I study French and English. All right, let me just get to it without further ado. Okay, I'll share my presentation. So again, thank you for inviting me. This is just my primer on African-American intellectual history. The earliest place I could think to start was pre-colonial Africa, sort of where the African-American experience begins at its earliest. And for this, I'm just going to do a bit of a highlight reel. The Kingdom of Kush, modern-day Sudan, the ancient city of Carthage, the Kingdom of Aksum, one of the 4 great powers in the 3rd century, the Mali Empire, some historical figures, Mansa Musa, the Malian king, who spent so much money on his pilgrimage to Mecca that he devalued the price of gold, Shaka Zulu, ancient Egypt, the Kushites, also from modern-day Sudan, who ruled Egypt during the 25th dynasty. And today, Africa has 54 countries, 54 modern countries, and this is Lagos in Nigeria. So, onto the intellectual history aspect. How has Africa been conceived of in literature and in culture and art in the United States and the world? Well, for a long time, Africa was thought of as a dark, savage continent without literature, without writing. And this view was to justify the civilizing mission and colonialism. And there was a book published in 1899 called Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad, which kind of solidified this image, although the book itself was a critique of colonialism. And it was about a English soldier journeying up the Congo River in the Belgian Congo. During the Berlin Conference, which took place in 1884 to 1885, Africa was divided into 50 territories, and the modern nations are largely a legacy of these colonial borders. Following the Second World War, there was an international decolonization movement where many African countries were gaining their independence, and then it became necessary to think of new ways to conceive of Africa. And Afro-pessimism was a kind of cultural approach where you would focus on sort of in one way, focusing on the negative impacts of what had happened in Africa, but also looking towards the future and trying to think of how these newly formed states should be governed. And a famous Afro-pessimist is Frantz Fanon, who was a political philosopher and psychologist from Martinique. And he said in his book, The Wretched of the Earth, "When I search for man in the technique and the style of Europe, I see only a succession of negations of man and an avalanche of murders. The human condition, plans for mankind, and collaboration between men in those tasks which increase the sum total of humanity are new problems which demand true inventions." So basically looking towards the future and trying to adopt new methods of dealing with things. And Africa has also been misrepresented a lot in taught history. For example, James Baldwin said who was an African-American intellectual, said in 1965, "When I was brought up, I was taught in American history books that Africa had no history and that neither had I. I was a savage about whom the less said the better, who had been saved by Europe and who had been brought to America. Of course, I believed it. I didn't have much choice. These were the only books there were. Everyone else seemed to agree. If you went out of Harlem, the whole world agreed. What you saw was much bigger, whiter, cleaner, safer. The garbage was collected, the children were happy. You could go back home and it would seem, of course, that this was an act of God. You belonged where white people put you. It is only since World War II that there has been a counter-image in the world. That image has not come about because of any legislation by any American government, but because Africa was suddenly on the stage of the world and Africans had to be dealt with in a way they had never been dealt with before. This gave the American Negro, for the first time, a sense of himself not as a savage. It has created and will create a great many conundrums." So what he means by suddenly on the stage of the world is this decolonization movement. But there was a problem in how Africa's pre-colonial history was taught. For example, as late as 1963, the Regius professor of history at Oxford said that there was nothing to see in Africa's history before the arrival of the Europeans than the unrewarding gyrations of barbarous tribes in picturesque but irrelevant corners of the globe. But how was Africa thought of by African Americans in the United States? In the 20s and 30s, you start to see a kind of nostalgia for Africa, which one can see in the poems of Langston Hughes, who was a Harlem Renaissance poet. The Pan-African flag was also created, so kind of reclaiming, show me the race of people without a flag, and I will show you a race of people with no pride. And that was a flag that was made by Marcus Garvey, and it's pictured here. Well, the red is for like the blood of Africans, the black is for Black people, and the green is for the natural resources of Africa. You have the expression like kings and queens to kings and queens, like kings and queens in Africa to these neighborhoods. Afrofuturism, it's a sort of aesthetic developed more in the 90s, sort of combining this vision of the future with like older African aesthetics, like one sees in Black Panther. And also because of like a more recent sort of mid 20th century effort, a historical scholarly effort to rediscover pre-colonial Africa, one starts to see more realistic depictions of pre-colonial life. For example, in 1948, the first departments for African history were created, and this was at the University of London and at Northeastern in the US. And universities had also begun to form in modern African countries, like in Nigeria and Uganda, who began establishing African studies departments in the 50s. And Things Fall Apart is one of the most famous like depictions of pre-colonial life that is in the more realistic style. He saw himself and his fathers crowding around their ancestral shrine, waiting in vain for worship and sacrifice, and finding nothing but ashes of bygone days. This was a book that was published 2 years before Nigerian independence. It's been sort of significant in forming the modern post-colonial image of pre-colonial Africa. And I thought I was just going to read some things kind of pertaining to this from my dossier. So here is an extract from The Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon, published in 1961. Come then, comrades, it would be as well to decide at once to change our ways. We must shake off the heavy darkness in which we were plunged and leave it behind. The new day which is already at hand must find us firm, prudent, and resolute. It is a question of the third world starting a new history of man, a history which will have regard to the sometimes prodigious theses which Europe has put forward, but which will also not forget Europe's crimes, of which the most horrible was committed in the heart of man and consisted of the pathological tearing apart of his functions and the crumbling away of his unity. And in the framework of the collectivity, there were the differentiations, the stratification of the bloodthirsty tensions fed by classes, and finally, on the immense scale of humanity, there were racial hatred, slavery, exploitation, and above all, the bloodless genocide, which consisted in the setting aside of 15,000 millions of men. So, comrades, let us not pay tribute to Europe by creating states, institutions, and societies, which draw their inspiration from her. And this is a poem that I think signifies this kind of cultural nostalgia in the 20s. The Negro Speaks of Rivers by Langston Hughes. I've known rivers, ancient as the world, and older than the flow of human blood in human veins. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. I bathed in the Euphrates when dawns were young. I built my hut near the Congo, and it lulled me to sleep. I looked upon the Nile and raised the pyramids above it. I heard the singing of the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans, and I've seen its muddy bosom turn all golden in the sunset. I've known rivers, ancient dusky rivers. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. Okay, so moving on to kind of the next phase. You can still see my present, okay. Contact with Europe, the transatlantic slave trade and colonialism. And I'm just gonna sum this up in a few quick facts. The slave trade spanned about 400 years from the 16th to the 19th centuries. 12 to 12.8 million Africans arrived in the New World. Others died on the ships, more were born into slavery once they arrived. And every part of Africa except for Ethiopia was at some point colonized. There's also a small area in the Western Sahara, which has been disputed territory historically. So the triangular trade, I think most people are familiar with this already. Slavery in the United States. So only around 400,000 slaves arrived in the United States from Africa, but due to the nature of American slavery, which was more internal and also exponential, by the eve of the Civil War, there were around 4 million in the United States. So to move on to kind of the cultural contributions of the slaves, you have the Negro Spiritual. This is a quote by Frederick Douglass. Slaves sing most when they are most unhappy. The songs of the slave represent the sorrows of his heart, and he is relieved by them only as an aching heart is relieved by its tears. So a Negro Spiritual, it was like a sort of they often had Christian themes or told like biblical stories, because that would have been something that they had access to. And often they would tell a story that one would imagine would have resonated with enslaved people. Sometimes they contained coded messages. For example, Go Down Moses is about Moses leading the Hebrew slaves out of Egypt. Didn't My Lord Deliver Daniel is about different times when like God in the Bible delivered people from peril. Roll Jordan Roll, it's about the River Jordan, which is in Africa, but it can also be compared to like the Mississippi River and the Ohio River, which were kind of on the way to the North States. Okay, so I'm just gonna play these. And this is a version sung by Paul Robeson, who is an interesting figure in his own right. He was the son of a former slave. He went on to win an academic scholarship to Rutgers University, where he played football. And then he received a law degree from Columbia and became an actor and singer. So this is his rendition.
When Israel was in Egypt land, let my not stand. Let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land. Hello, the Pharaoh, to let my people go. Thus spake the laudable Moses said, let my people go. If not, I'll smite your firstborn dead. Let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land. Hello, the Pharaoh, to let my people go. No more shall they in bondage toil. Let my people go. Let them come out with Egypt's spoil. Let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land. Hello, the Pharaoh, to let my people go.
So that's Go Down Moses. And as I'm saying that, I really hope like you heard it, that the volume, that the screen sharing worked, but I'll play this one next.
Did my Lord deliver Daniel, deliver Daniel, deliver Daniel? Did my Lord deliver Daniel, and why not every man? He delivered Daniel from the lion's den, Jonah from the belly of a whale, and the Hebrew children from the fiery furnace, and why not every man? Did my Lord deliver Daniel, deliver Daniel, deliver Daniel? Did my Lord deliver Daniel, and why not every man? The moon runs down in a purple stream, the sun refused to shine. Every star did disappear, yes, freedom shall be mine. Did my Lord deliver Daniel, deliver Daniel, deliver Daniel? Did my Lord deliver Daniel, and why not every man?
And this last one, the clip that I have is from the movie 12 Years a Slave. It's Roll, Jordan, Roll.
Went down to the river Jordan, where John baptized 3. When I walked the devil in hell, says Johnny baptized me. I say, roll, Jordan, roll. Oh, now roll, Jordan, roll. My soul will rise ever, Lord, for the year Jordan roll. Well, some say John was a Baptist. Some say John was a Jew. But I say John was a preacher, cause my Bible says so too. I say, roll, Jordan, roll. Roll,
when Jordan rode.
Oh, children.
Roll, Jordan, roll. Roll, Jordan, roll. My soul arise in heaven, Lord, for the year when Jordan rolled.
Hallelujah.
Roll, Jordan, roll. Roll, Jordan, roll. My soul arise in heaven, Lord, for the year when Jordan rolled.
So that was Roll, Jordan, Roll. And obviously there's a lot more of these, like Wade in the Water, Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. And there's like more modern versions as well. Like Louis Armstrong has a jazz version of Go Down Moses, which I think is like pretty well known. I just didn't include like Swing Low, Sweet Chariot because I thought that people would have heard it already. Okay, so on to the next slide. Okay, so the abolitionists were people, both white and Black, who opposed slavery. And I would consider speeches to be part of literature. So you have some great orations from this time. For example, there's the Ain't I a Woman speech from Sojourner Truth. There's John Brown's last address. And he was a white abolitionist who had attempted to start a slave rebellion by doing a raid on Harper's Ferry in Virginia, but it was unsuccessful and he ended up being executed. So yeah, the abolitionist movement was quite significant during this time. Slave narratives were a literary genre that became popular during this time, and these were books, about the lives of slaves. And there were imitations and there were fictional ones, but of course the most famous, the most enduring were the true slave narratives, which was like autobiographies written by slaves who had managed to escape. For example, narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass. And Frederick Douglass was a slave who had been born into slavery in, I think it was, and then escaped by posing as a sailor, and then became an abolitionist. 12 Years a Slave by Solomon Northup. Solomon Northup had been born free in the North, then kidnapped and sold into slavery in Georgia. And a Canadian who worked with him helped him obtain freedom. And my personal favorite is Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl by Harriet Jacobs. And she escaped by hiding in a small attic for 7 years before the opportunity came to escape on a boat which was heading north. No matter whether the slave girl be as Black as ebony or as fair as her mistress, there's no shadow of law to protect her from insult, from violence, or even from death. All these are inflicted by fiends who wear the shape of men. And then I would read to you some things from this time period. And this is an extract from Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, and it deals with Negro spirituals. It's written 1845. And he writes, I have sometimes thought that the mere hearing of those songs would do more to impress some minds with the horrible character of slavery than the reading of whole volumes of philosophy on the subject could do. I did not, when a slave, understand the deep meaning of those rude and apparently incoherent songs. I was myself within the circle, so that I neither saw nor heard as those without might see and hear. They told a tale of woe which was then altogether beyond my feeble comprehension. They were tones loud, long, and deep. They breathed the prayer and complaint of souls boiling over with the bitterest anguish. Every tone was a testimony against slavery and a prayer to God for deliverance from chains. The hearing of those wild notes always depressed my spirit and filled me with ineffable sadness. I have frequently found myself in tears while hearing them. The mere recurrence to those songs even now afflicts me, and while I am writing these lines, an expression of feeling has already found its way down my cheek. To those songs, I trace my first glimmering conception of the dehumanizing character of slavery. I can never get rid of that conception. Those songs still follow me to deepen my hatred of slavery and quicken my sympathies for my brethren in bonds. If anyone wishes to be impressed with the soul-killing effects of slavery, let him go to Colonel Lloyd's plantation and, on allowance day, place himself in the deep pine woods, and there let him, in silence, analyze the sounds that shall pass through the chambers of his soul. And if he is not thus impressed, it will only be because there is no flesh in his obdurate heart. And here I have some words from Harriet Tubman, spoken, obviously paraphrased, but spoken to her biographer, Sarah Hopkins Bradford, in Scenes in the Life of Harriet Tubman, which was published in 1861. I reasoned out this in my mind. There was one of two things I had a right to, liberty or death. If I could not have one, I would have the other, for no man should take me alive. I should fight for my liberty as long as my strength lasted, and when the time came for me to go, the Lord would let them take me. I looked at my hands to see if I was the same person now I was free. There was such a glory over everything. The sun came like gold through the trees and other fields, and I felt like I was in heaven. I knew of a man who was sent to the state prison for 25 years. All these years, he was always thinking of his home and counting by years, months, and days the time till he should be free and see his family and friends once more. The years roll on, the time of imprisonment is over, the man is free. He leaves the prison gates, he makes his way to his old home, but his old home is not there. The house in which he has dwelt his childhood has been torn down, and a new one had been put up in its place. His family were gone, their very name forgotten. There was no one to take him by the hand to welcome him back to life. So it was with me. I had crossed the line of which I had so long been dreaming. I was free, but there was no one to welcome me to the land of freedom. I was a stranger in a strange land, and my home, after all, was down in the old cabin quarter with the old folks and my brothers and sisters. But to this solemn resolution I came. I was free, and they should be free also. I would make a home for them in the north, and the Lord helping me, I would bring them all here. Oh, how I prayed then, lying all alone on the cold, damp ground. Oh, dear Lord, I said, I ain't got no friend but you. Come to my help, Lord, for I'm in trouble. And this is an extract from Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl in a chapter called Childhood, which was written by Harriet Jacobs. And these are both from the same chapter, The Trials of Girlhood. He told me I was his property, that I must be subject to his will in all things. My soul revolted against the mean tyranny, but where could I turn for protection? No matter whether the slave girl be as black as ebony or as fair as her mistress. In either case, there is no shadow of law to protect her from insult, from violence, or even from death. All these are inflicted by fiends who bear the shape of men. The mistress, who ought to protect the helpless victim, has no other feelings towards her but those of jealousy and rage. The degradation, the wrongs, the vices that grow out of slavery are more than I can describe. They are greater than you would willingly believe. Surely, if you credited one half the truths that are told you concerning the helpless millions suffering in this cruel bondage, you at the North would not help to tighten the yoke. You surely would refuse to do for the master on your own soil the mean and cruel work which trained bloodhounds and the lowest class of whites do for him at the South. Oh, what days and nights of fear and sorrow that man caused me. Reader, it is not to awaken sympathy for myself that I am telling you truthfully what I suffered in slavery. I do it to kindle a flame of compassion in your hearts for my sisters who are still in bondage, suffering as I once suffered. I once saw two beautiful children playing together. One was a fair white child, the other was her slave and also her sister. When I saw them embracing each other and heard their joyous laughter, I turned sadly away from the lovely sight. I foresaw the inevitable blight that would fall on the little slave's heart. I knew how soon her laughter would be changed to sighs. The fair child grew up to be a still fairer woman. From childhood to womanhood, her pathway was blooming with flowers and overarched by a sunny sky. Scarcely one day of her life had been clouded when the sun rose on her happy bridal morning. How had those years dealt with her slave sister, the little playmate of her childhood? She also was very beautiful, but the flowers and sunshine of love were not for her. She drank the cup of sin and shame and misery, whereof her persecuted race are compelled to drink. In view of these things, why are ye silent, ye free men and women of the North? Why do your tongues falter in maintenance of the right? Would that I had more ability, but my heart is so full and my pen is so weak. There are noble men and women who plead for us, striving to help those who cannot help themselves. God bless them. God give them strength and courage to go on. God bless those everywhere who are laboring to advance the cause of humanity. So it's quite clearly like an abolitionist novel at the same time as being a slave narrative. Okay, so next, the Civil War, 1861 to 1865. I think this is something that everyone has gone over in school. The Union versus the Confederacy. Abraham Lincoln had run a mainly abolitionist campaign. He issued the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, declaring that all the slaves in the Confederate States would be free. And I think that something culturally which came out of this time period is sort of the military songs, the battle songs, the marching songs of the Union and the Confederacy. And I feel like John Brown's body is an interesting study because there are so many different versions of it, like different lyric versions. For example, John Brown's body is about John Brown, who was the white abolitionist who had attempted to start a slave rebellion. And I have like some of the lyrics, like, old John Brown's body lies moldering in the grave, while weep the sons of bondage whom we ventured out to save. And though he lost his life in his struggle to free the slaves, his soul is marching on. And there's the Battle Hymn of the Republic, which I think is the most famous version. And it was written also by a white female abolitionist and suffragette, whose name was Julia Ward Howe. In the beauty of the lilies, Christ was born across the sea, with a glory in his bosom that transfigures you and me. As he died to make men holy, let us die to make men free, because truth is marching on. And the version that I'm going to play is a version that was sung by Black soldiers in the Arkansas Negro Regiment. Just to double check, can everyone hear like the words?
I can hear you speaking.
Okay. Did you hear like the song as well before?
The other three songs I heard, I didn't hear this.
Okay, good. I haven't played it yet. Okay. So thank you. Okay. Okay, just let me. Okay.
Oh, we're the bully soldiers of the 1st of Arkansas. We are fighting for the Union. We are fighting for the law. We can hit a rebel further than a white man ever saw as we go marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Hallelujah, as we go marching on. We heard the proclamation, Master, hush it as he will. The bird, he sing it to us, hopping on the cotton hill. The possum up the gum tree, he couldn't keep it still as he went climbing on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Hallelujah, as we go marching on. We have done with hoe and cotton. We have done with hoe and corn. We are colored Yankee soldiers, just as sure as you are born. When the master hears us yelling, they will think it's Gabriel's horn as we go marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah, as we go marching on. Fall in, you colored brethren, you had better do it soon. Don't you hear the drum a-drumming to the Yankee Doodle tune? We are with you now this morning, we'll be far away at noon as we go marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Hallelujah, as we go marching on. As we go marching on.
Okay, so what happened after the Civil War? And this is a quote that I've heard used sometimes in in connection to this time period. The summer is past, the harvest is ended, and we are not saved. So the slaves were freed after the Civil War. And then there was a period called Reconstruction, which was sort of when like the infrastructure and everything of the South was being built back up, and Union soldiers were still occupying the territory to oversee the integration of the freedmen, the former slaves, into society. And during this time, Black people had the right to vote and the right to be represented in politics. So there were Black people in Congress, Black people being elected into local government positions. Lincoln's assassination, however, and the Compromise of 1877, when the Union Army withdrew from the South, led to changes for Reconstruction. For example, Black codes were enacted and laws restricting the movements of Black people. There was the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, which I have on the slide here. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for a crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. So this did allow for a kind of loophole, and there were things like vagrancy laws, which made it easier to have the continuation of either cheap or free labor. So you had like chain gangs, then the sharecropping system, which was like tenant farming. You would live on an area of land, and then you would either sell or yield a majority of what you harvested in order to continue to rent that land. Lynchings were a form of mob justice, where someone would be tortured and killed either on suspicion of having committed a crime, whether they had done it or not. And so due to this situation in the South, there was the Great Migration, in which a great number of Black people over a long period of time slowly kind of migrated to the North. The Jim Crow laws, legalized segregation. But during the 19th and 20th century, there was also the rise of a small Black intellectual class, because there had been HBCUs, that's historically Black colleges and universities, for a very long time. Some had been founded in Pennsylvania and Ohio prior to the Civil War, educational institutes for Black people, and more HBCUs were built in the South by the Freedmen's Bureau, which was a federal organization designed during Reconstruction to help former slaves adjust to freedom. There had also been universities in the North, which allowed Black people to study there. And then some prominent African-American intellectuals during this time period are, so of the 19th and 20th century, are James Baldwin, who was an American writer born in Harlem. And I think that he was able to sort of explain things with a lot of perspective, and so they stood clear to everyone. There's Booker T. Washington, the author of Up From Slavery, and he wanted Black self-improvement and for Black people to accept discrimination for the time being and to try and elevate themselves through hard work and entrepreneurship. W.E.B. Du Bois, who was a kind of opponent of Booker T. Washington's views, the author of The Souls of Black Folk, and he wanted political action and for Black people to demand civil rights. And he founded the NAACP, which was the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Richard Wright was an author, and he put out depictions of what it was like to be a Black man at his time. Langston Hughes, the Harlem Renaissance poet, and he included African aesthetics and sort of represented the African American experience in kind of a more like colorful way in his poems. And something that I've always found interesting is sort of like the European perspectives on the situation in America, because in the 19th and 20th century, you have people coming from Europe to America and seeing the situation and sort of reflecting on it from their own perspective. And one such person was Jerome K. Jerome, who, despite his name, was English. And he was the author of Three Men in a Boat, which was a very popular comedy book that made him famous enough to go on a press tour of America, doing readings and appearances. And in his autobiography years later, he had devoted a chapter to his time in America, describing American society and how he saw Black people being treated there. Vladimir Nabokov was a Russian writer from an aristocratic family who had fled Russia after the revolution and ended up in America, where he had to write in English and supplement his income by teaching, which he did at Wellesley, Stanford, Harvard, other places. And at one point he gave guest lectures at a Black women's college, Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia. And while he was there, he wrote letters to his wife, Vera. And Gunnar Myrdal was a Swedish economist, and he had been asked by an American educational fund to come to America and offer a neutral perspective on how they could try and fix, the problem. And in his book, he outlined he laid the groundwork for some of the anti-discrimination policies we have today. And he wrote, for example, the breakdown of discrimination in one part of the labor market facilitates a similar change in all other parts of it. The vicious cycle can be reversed. And there was also kind of a foreign perspective coming from Black people, Black Americans themselves, who had gone to Europe been treated, differently in Europe than they were here, and reflected on what that was like. For example, Paul Robeson had visited the Soviet Union, and he said that, "Here I am not a Negro, but a human being. Before I came here, I could hardly believe that such a thing could be. Here, for the first time in my life, I walk in full human dignity." And I was going to play this clip of James Baldwin talking about his years in France.
I would like to add someone to our group here. Professor Paul Weiss, a Sterling Professor of Philosophy at Yale. Were you able to listen to the show backstage?
I heard a good deal of it, but then I was behind the rostrum here.
Yes.
So I heard only some of it.
Did you hear anything that you disagreed with? Or
I
that
disagreed with a great deal of it. And of course, there's a good deal I agree with. But I think he's overlooking one very important matter, I think. Each one of us, I think, is terribly alone. He lives his own individual life. He has all kinds of obstacles in the way of religion or color or size or shape or lack of ability, and the problem is to become a man.
But what I was discussing was not that problem, really. I was discussing the difficulties, the obstacles, the very real danger of death thrown up by this society when a black man attempts to become a man.
All this emphasis upon black man and white does emphasize something which is here, but it emphasizes it or perhaps exaggerates it, and therefore makes us put people together in groups which they ought not to be in. I have more in common with a black scholar than I have with a white man who's against scholarship. And you have more in common with a white author than you have with someone who's against all literature. So why must we always concentrate on color or on religion or this? There are other ways of connecting men.
I'll tell you this. When I left this country in 1948, I left this country for one reason only, one reason. I didn't care where I went. I might have gone to Hong Kong, I might have gone to Timbuktu. I ended up in Paris, on the streets of Paris, with $40 in my pocket on the theory that nothing worse could happen to me there than it already happened to me here. You talk about making it as a writer by yourself. You had to be able then to turn off all the antenna with which you live, because once you turn your back on this society, you may die. You may die. And it's very hard to sit at a typewriter and concentrate on that if you're afraid of the world around you. The years I lived in Paris did one thing for me. They released me from that particular social terror, which was not the paranoia of my own mind, but a real social danger visible in the face of every cop, every boss, everybody. I don't know what most white people in this country feel, but I can only conclude what they feel from the state of their institutions. I don't know if white Christians hate Negroes or not, but I know that we have a Christian church which is white and a Christian church which is black. I know, as Malcolm X once put it, that the most segregated hour in American life is high noon on Sunday. That says a great deal for me about a Christian nation. It means that I can't afford to trust most white Christians and certainly cannot trust the Christian church. I don't know whether the labor unions and their bosses really hate me. That doesn't matter, but I know I'm not in their unions. I don't know if the real estate lobby is anything against black people, but I know the real estate lobbies keep me in the ghetto. I don't know if the Board of Education hates black people, but I know the textbooks I give my children to read and the schools that we have to go to. Now, this is the evidence. You want me to make an act of faith, risking myself, my wife, my woman, my sister, my children, on some idealism which you assure me exists in America, which I have never seen.
I would like to add.
Yes, okay. So another thing from this time period, coming from African Americans, is the music of the chain gang. So chain gangs were prisoners chained to each other or attached to a ball and chain and made to do hard labor for industrial purposes, such as laying down railroad tracks, clearing land, or building roads. And Black prisoners would sing call and response work songs, timed to coincide with the strike of a hammer or axe. And a stomp or a strike would begin the song, and then the leader would sing out the first part of the two-part structure, and the rest of the convicts would respond with the second part of the phrase. And in the 1930s, Alan Lomax, who was a song collector and activist, visited the state penitentiaries in the South, and he recorded chain gang songs. And he said, "These songs belong to the musical tradition which Africans brought to the New World, but they are also as American as the Mississippi River. They tell us the story of the slave gang, the sharecropper system, the lawless work camp, the chain gang, the pen." And this song, which I'm going to play for you, was recorded at the Mississippi State Penitentiary's Parchman Work Camp in 1947, and it's called Rosie. And since it's an authentic recording, it's a bit hard to hear what they're saying. So when I play it, I'm gonna put the lyrics up at the same time.
Be my woman, girl, be your man. Be my woman, girl, be your man. Be my woman, girl, be your man. Get this son is dollar in your hand, Lord, in your
So that's an example of a chain gang song, and these influenced the development of musical history a lot. For example, you can hear it in songs like, which I think is pretty well known. You know the song "I Fought the Law"? Like, okay, you don't want me to sing, but it's like, I fought the law and the law won. You can kind of hear it still. And also this, you find this rhythm like in blues and in jazz. For example, Nina Simone did a cover of Rosie, a jazz cover called "Be My Husband," which is like the song but from a female perspective. Okay, so moving on. The Harlem Renaissance, which I think the Harlem Renaissance was a Black cultural movement, and it encompassed music, art, literature, stage plays. And during the Great Migration, many Black people had settled in the neighborhood of Harlem in New York City. So during this time, African Americans started appearing in mainstream pop culture, and Black music styles like jazz, blues, rock and roll began to be appreciated by more people. And plays by Black playwrights like Wallace Thurman and William Rapp's play Harlem made it to Broadway. The first Black pop culture celebrities emerged, like Paul Robeson, Louis Armstrong, and Josephine Baker. That's a picture of Josephine Baker. But she mostly became famous in France. Black magazines began to be popular, like the magazine Fire, which published fictional stories about Harlem residents and the nightlife there. In Harlem, there were speakeasies where jazz was played and alcohol was sold, which was illegal during Prohibition. And the Harlem Renaissance can be said to have neared its end, sort of with the Great Depression. Black Boy was a book written by Richard Wright, who was, an author during this time. I would hurl words into the darkness and wait for an echo. And if an echo sounded, no matter how faintly, I would send other words to tell, to march, to fight, to create a sense of the hunger for life that gnaws in us all. So before we move on to the next phase, I'm just going to read some works from this time period. This is an extract from The Souls of Black Folk, which was written in 1903 by W.E.B. Du Bois. And this section is from Of Our Spiritual Strivings. Okay. Between me and the other world, there is ever an unasked question, unasked by some through feelings of delicacy, by others through the difficulty of rightly framing it. All nevertheless flutter around it. They approach me in a half-hesitant sort of way, eye me curiously or compassionately, and then, instead of saying directly, "How does it feel to be a problem?" they say, "I know an excellent colored man in my town," or "I fought at Mechanicsville," or "Do not these Southern outrages make your blood boil?" At these I smile or am interested or reduce the boiling to a simmer, as the occasion may require. To the real question, how does it feel to be a problem, I answer seldom a word. And yet, being a problem is a strange experience, peculiar even for one who has never been anything else, save perhaps in babyhood and in Europe. It is in the early days of rollicking boyhood that the revelation first burst upon me, all in a day, as it were. I remember well when the shadow swept across me. I was a little thing, away up in the hills of New England, where the dark Housatonic winds between Hoosac and Taganic to the sea. In a wee wooden schoolhouse, something put it into the boys and girls' heads to buy gorgeous visiting cards, 10 cents a package in exchange. The exchange was merry, till one girl, a tall newcomer, refused my card, refused it peremptorily with a glance. Then it dawned upon me with a certain suddenness that I was different from the others, or like mayhap, in heart and life and longing, but shut out from their world by a vast veil. I had thereafter no desire to tear down that veil, to creep through. I held all beyond it in common contempt, and I lived above it in a region of blue sky and great wandering shadows. The sky was bluest when I could beat my mates at examination time, or beat them at a foot race, or even beat their stringy heads. Alas, with the years, all this fine contempt began to fade, for the words I longed for, and all their dazzling opportunities, were theirs, not mine. But they should not keep these prizes, I said. Some, all, I would wrest from them. Just how I would do it, I could never decide. By reading law, by healing the sick, by telling the wonderful tales that swam in my head, some way. With other Black boys, the strife was not so fiercely sunny. Their youth shrank into tasteless sycophancy, or into silent hatred of the pale world around them, and a mocking distrust of everything white, or wasted itself in a bitter cry. Why did God make me an outcast and a stranger in mine own house? The shades of the prison house closed round us all, walls straight and stubborn to the whitest, but relentlessly narrow, tall and unscalable to sons of night who must plod darkly on in resignation, or beat unavailing palms against the stone, or steadily, half-hopelessly watch the streak of blue above. After the Egyptian and Indian, the Greek and Roman, the Teuton and Mongolian, the Negro was a sort of seventh son, born with a veil and gifted with second sight in this American world, a world which yields him no true self-consciousness, but only lets him see himself through the revelation of the other world. It is a peculiar sensation, this double consciousness, this sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others, of measuring one's soul by the tape of a world that looks on in amused contempt and pity. One ever feels his two-ness, an American, a Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideals in one dark body, whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder. So he's kind of saying that he's explaining the sort of the separation as a kind of veil through which like everything is seen. And this is, I don't know, maybe I should skip this part, I don't know, but I should apply a bit of a trigger warning to this one, because this is from the chapter called America, from Jerome K. Jerome's 1925 autobiography, and he describes like lynchings. So if it's a bit violent, you can like just turn on mute or something. But this was written by him in 1925. But it was about an earlier trip that took place in 1908. I ask my American friends, and I have many, I know, to forgive me. Who am I to lecture the American nation? I feel myself the absurdity of it, the impertinence. My plea is that I am growing old, and it comes to me that before long I may be called upon to stand before the judge of all the earth and to make answer concerning the things that I have done, and perhaps of even more importance, the things I have left undone. The thoughts I'm about to set down keeps ringing in my brain. It will not go away. I am afraid any longer to keep silence. There are many of power and authority who could have spoken it better. I would it had not been left to me. If it makes men angry, I am sorry. The treatment of the Negro in America calls to heaven for redress. I've sat with men who, amid vile jokes and laughter, told of buck niggers being slowly roasted alive, told how they screamed and writhed and prayed, how their eyes rolled inward as the flames crept up till nothing could be seen but 2 white balls. They burn mere boys alive and sometimes women. These things are organized for the town's leading citizens. Well-dressed women crowd to the show, children are lifted up upon their fathers' shoulders. The law, represented by grinning policemen, stands idly by. Preachers from their pulpits glorify these things and tell their congregation that God approves. The Southern press roars its encouragement. Hangings, shootings would be terrible enough. These burnings, these slow grillings of living men, chained down to iron bedsteads, these tearings of live, quivering flesh with red-hot pincers can be done only to glut some hideous lust of cruelty. The excuse generally given is an insult to human intelligence. Even if true, it would be no excuse. In the majority of cases, it is not even pretended. The history of the Spanish Inquisition unrolls no greater shame upon the human race. The auto de fe, at least, was not planned for the purpose of amusing a mob. In the face of this gigantic horror, the lesser sufferings of the Negro race in America may look insignificant. But there must be tens of thousands of educated, cultured men and women cursed with the touch of the tar brush, to whom life must be one long tragedy. Shunned, hated, despised, they have not the rights of a dog. From no white man dare they even defend the honor of their women. I have seen them waiting at the ticket offices, the jibe and butt of the crowd, not venturing to approach till the last white man was served. I have known a woman in the pains of childbirth made to travel in the cattle wagon. For no injury at the hands of any white man is there any redress. American justice is not colorblind. Will the wrong never end? So this is the observations of an Englishman in 1925. But his chapter on America is very interesting. And it's not just about, like the problem with racism. He also describes like other aspects of American society, how impressive New York is, how beautiful the country is, people's hospitality. He complains about that the trains are late. It's very interesting. And this is from the Russian professor to his wife. This is a letter written later in 1942 from Atlanta, Georgia. So he writes, "To the west, cotton plantations and the prosperity of the numerous Cokers," that was the family he was staying with, "who seem to own half of Hartsville, is founded on this very cotton industry. It is picking time now, and the darkies, an expression that jars me, reminding me distantly of the patriarchal zhidok of Western Russian landowners, pick in the fields, getting $1 for 100 bushels. I'm reporting these interesting facts because they stuck mechanically in my ears. In the evenings, those who have children rarely go out because, despite their wealth, they have no one to leave the kids with. Negro servants never sleep over in the whites' homes. It is not allowed. And they cannot have white servants because they cannot work with blacks. There are Uncle Toms sitting in every corner here. I kiss you, my dear sweetheart, and please do not imagine that I am running after Creole girls here. Here they're more the Miss Perkins type, and the younger women have fiery husbands. I barely see any girl students." So that's a letter from 1942, written in October from Atlanta. And I don't know who Miss Perkins is. Maybe it's like an internal reference with him and his wife. I almost forgot. This is the last thing that I'm going to read from this time period, but it's from Black Boy by Richard Wright. And it's just the part of the book that I found the most beautiful, just in terms of the prose style and the way it's written. This is from 1945. Each event spoke with a cryptic tongue, and the moments of living slowly revealed their coded meanings. There was the wonder I felt when I first saw a brace of mountain-like spotted black and white horses clopping down a dusty road through clouds of powdered clay. There was the delight I caught in seeing long, straight rows of red and green vegetables stretching away in the sun to the bright horizon. There was the faint, cool kiss of sensuality when dew came onto my cheeks and shins as I ran down the wet green garden paths in the early morning. There was the vague sense of the infinite as I looked down on the yellow, dreaming waters of the Mississippi River from the verdant bluffs of Natchez. There were the echoes of nostalgia I heard and the crying strings of wild geese winging south against a bleak autumn sky. There was the tantalizing melancholy and the tingling scent of burning hickory wood. There was the teasing and impossible desire to imitate the petty pride of sparrows wallowing and flouncing in the red dust of country roads. There was the yearning for identification loosed in me by the sight of a solitary ant carrying a burden upon a mysterious journey. There was the disdain that filled me as I tortured a delicate blue-pink crawfish that huddled fearfully in the mudstill of a rusty tin can. There was the aching glory in masses of clouds burning gold and purple from an invisible sun. That's just my favorite part of the book. It goes on like that for a bit, and the rest is not in that style, but yes. Okay, so the Civil Rights Movement took place in the 1950s and 60s. It involved peaceful protests for legislative reforms. And those famous episodes of the Civil Rights Movement are the Montgomery bus boycott, when Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on the bus, the Little Rock Nine, who were 9 Black students who were the first to integrate into a newly desegregated school in Arkansas. Ruby Bridges, also a student integrating into a school. Woolworth's lunch counter, which was an incident that started the protest form of sit-ins. People would go to a restaurant that did not serve Black people and then just refuse to leave. The March Against Fear is, I think, a bit lesser known. James Meredith was the first Black student at the University of Mississippi, and he had decided to do a march, a solo march, in order to encourage voter registration. But on his way, he was shot. He didn't die, though. He was just injured. But Martin Luther King decided to take up this march in his name, and they organized the March Against Fear. The Selma to Montgomery March, the March on Washington, where Martin Luther King gave his famous I Have a Dream speech. And this did lead to important legislative changes. And there were some landmark civil rights cases of the time. For example, Brown v. Board of Education, 1954. Separate educational facilities are inherently unequal. Loving versus Virginia, legalizing interracial marriage. The Voting Rights Act, prohibiting discrimination in voting. Civil Rights Act, which outlawed legalized segregation and Jim Crow laws. Adjacent to the Civil Rights Movement was the Black Power movement. And there was the Black Panther Party, which had like a Marxist socialist ideology. They were opposed to the Vietnam War and police brutality. They'd been founded in Oakland, California. Some things associated with them are the raised fist, these slogans like Black Power, Freedom Now. And they had been targeted by the FBI and the counterintelligence program. And they were, one could say, a bit less organized than the Civil Rights Movement. And they had more of a focus on like self-defense, and they had tried to like kind of have like weapons. They were officially dissolved in 1982, although it had been sort of fragmentary for a while before that as well. So again, speeches, I would say that's part of literature. There's of course the famous I Have a Dream speech. There's also the Ballot or the Bullet, which was a speech by Malcolm X about the importance of voting. A speech by Stokely Carmichael given at UC Berkeley, I think it was. And during this period, there's also more like music, which was used by the different movements. For example, the song We Shall Overcome is associated with the Civil Rights Movement, which is a gospel song. And with the Black Power movement, I think that's more associated with like early rap and hip hop, which was beginning to form at the time in urban communities in the US. For example, there's the song The Revolution Will Not Be Televised. And there's the song by James Brown, Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud. I don't know if I'm gonna play it or not. I guess, I don't know, I might as well play it.
Put your bad self, say it loud. Say it loud. Look here, some people say we got a lot of malice, some say it's a lot of nerve. But I say we won't quit moving until we get what we deserve. We've been buked and we've been scorned. We've been treated bad, talked about, as sure as you born. Just as sure as it takes 2 eyes to make a pair. Brother, we can't quit until we get our share. Say it loud. Say it loud. One more time. Say it loud. I've worked on jobs with my feet in my hand. You know, all the work I did was for the other man. Now we demand a chance to do things for ourselves. We're tired of beating our head against the wall and working for someone else. Say it loud. Say it loud. Say it loud. Say it loud. Ow! Ooh-wee. for someone else. Look here, one more thing I got to say right here. Now we're people, we like the birds and the bees. We'd rather die on our feet than keep living on our knees. Say it loud. Say it loud. Say it loud. Lord, Lord, Lord. Say it loud. All right now. Lord, you know we can do the blues. Now we can say we do the funky Broadway. Now we do. Sometimes we dance, we sing and we talk.
So I think song is a bit kind of a result and part of a cause of a kind of shift in attitude, in the culture. Okay, and then to sort of bring us into more modern times, these are just some of my favorite African-American firsts in the US. Just some examples of breaking the color barrier. Jackie Robinson, 1947, the first Major League Baseball player. Mae Jemison, the first Black woman in space. Misty Copeland, the first Black ballet dancer at American Ballet Theater. Gwendolyn Brooks, the first Pulitzer Prize winner. And Debbie Thomas, 1988, the first African-American to medal in Olympic figure skating. I don't know, I like Debbie Thomas because I used to do figure skating, right? So, and there are other Black figure skaters. For example, there's Surya Bonali, who was famous for being able to do a backflip and landing on a 1 foot outside edge landing. But she's French, unfortunately. Or no, I mean, good for her, but I couldn't include her in African-American firsts. So, and what are some modern African-American perspectives? There's the Black Lives Matter movement, and there's, I've just included some things that are happening. Ta-Nehisi Coates, Between the World and Me, which sort of echoes the same things as Du Bois's ideas about the veil. Yeah, and just some concluding thoughts. This is a poem by Lucille Clifton, who was a contemporary of Langston Hughes, but I think she passed away more recently. And she has this poem called I Am Accused of Tending to the Past. And this is the last thing I'm going to read. Okay. I am accused of tending to the past as if I made it, as if I sculpted it with my own hands. I did not. This past was waiting for me when I came, a monstrous unnamed baby, and I, with my mother's itch, took it to breast and named it history. She is more human now, learning language every day, remembering faces, names, and dates. When she is strong enough to travel on her own, beware, she will. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Astrid. You can stop sharing and we will take any questions that you have. Please put those into the Q&A feature because we can, I can tend to them a little bit easier that way than if you put them in the chat. And we did have one question that came in earlier, just somebody asking about the recording. So if anybody had to leave early, or if you have a friend who left early, we are recording and we will be posting this on our YouTube channel. So we'll wait a minute for any questions to come in. I kind of jotted a couple down, so I'll start with one while we wait for others to enter theirs. You said that Ethiopia was like the only country in Africa that wasn't colonized, I believe, or maybe another area as well. Is there something different about Ethiopia that kind of gave it that distinction?
Well, Ethiopia has a very interesting history, and I only know this from having researched it briefly. So, please look it up afterwards because I might get the facts wrong. But Ethiopia was never colonized, but it was occupied by Italy for a number of years in the 30s and 40s, I think. Although it never achieved the status of a colonized country. And I think, from what I can remember, the emperor of Ethiopia at the time had learned how to make, they had gotten guns from Christian missionaries, and they had partnered with different European states that were friendly towards them at the time. For example, at one point they were in partnership with the USSR. So it was basically just strategy and like kind of continuing to make the correct decision, and like fighting people off. I don't know if geography contributed or anything, and there's some other African countries that have a bit of a different colonization history. For example, Liberia was actually colonized by free African Americans who had been sent to Liberia at the beginning of a long time ago, at least. I'm sorry, I don't remember. By the American Colonization Society, and one other country. Yeah, but besides that, it's all like European colonies, the whole continent, which achieved their independence mostly in the 1960s.
So we have a comment that this was a fantastic presentation. Thank you so much, Astrid. So that was a not so much a question, but a comment. Thank you for that. The very first song that you played, "Go Down Moses," you know, that was obviously like "Let My People Go." Do you know of any writings that kind of would explain like how enslavers kind of reacted to hearing that song being sung around them? You know, are there any thoughts that we know that they had about that?
Personally, I'm not entirely sure, but from reading different slave narratives, it seems like, I don't know, people kind of used religion as a way, people thought it would be a good thing for the slaves to have religion, to be religious. And these were like, the Bible would have been one of the only things that they would have had access to. So I think, and I know that people would use these songs to sort of throw the owners off the trail. So I don't know, I think maybe they understood the connection, or why slaves would be singing "Let My People Go," but I don't think, you know, he mentioned like singing, that they would sing these songs on Allowance Day. So I don't think it was like really greatly punished or anything.
Thank you. You mentioned that incident in the life of a slave girl is a favorite of yours, of the slave, what were they called? Narratives, slave narrative. Was there something personally that makes you have a connection to that?
Well, I just like her attitude. I feel like a lot of times, like African American writers tend to, or no, I don't want to like generalize, but I feel like sometimes, especially with an abolitionist novel where you're advocating for a cause, there's a tendency to kind of backtrack and like keep kind of interrupting yourself to be like, well, of course, I'm not saying that all slave owners are bad. I just, you know, and she doesn't really do that. She just says what she wants to say. And there's this, I don't know, there's just like feeling of resistance in her narrative, which is, I mean, not unique, but kind of special. And I don't know, she's a bit like, she's kind of sarcastic and like funny. Like she says at one point, like most, like she's like criticizing her mistress at one point. She says, like most Southern women, she was completely deficient in energy. Like she didn't have the energy to, you know, cook, but she was able to stomach the sight of someone being like whipped until the blood ran. And she says things like that.
Yeah, well, it sounds like her attitude is kind of coming through there.
Yeah, that's what I liked. You know, it's a bit less like, oh well, you know, like just turn the other cheek and like bear the suffering. She was like, no.
Yeah, we have a comment in the chat. She was the clapback queen of her time.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think it was the last song you played, the "Say It Loud."
Mm-hmm.
I thought I could hear the call and response. Was I hearing that correct?
I think so, yeah. I mean, I am like very not musical, but yeah. Yeah, I heard it too.
Yeah, I thought so. I really loved all of the songs that you played. I thought that was very powerful. And I'd never heard many of them before. So that was all new to me. And so I think we're going to close out for the night. This has been a really engaging conversation and presentation. So thank you, Astrid Grandfarley, for participating. Thank you for participating in our guest speaker series. PTA appreciates the opportunity to learn And we'll give you a virtual round of applause. And also thank you to the audience for contributing to the discussion and for just spending some time with PTA today. And as a reminder, a recording of tonight's event will be posted on our 6th District PTA YouTube channel. So in a moment, I'm going to stop the recording. I'm going to close out the webinar, and I believe that is going to kick all of us out. So on behalf of everyone, and just I see a lot of thank yous showing up in the chat right now. So again, thank you, Astrid. I'll be in touch really soon. But on behalf of everyone and to everyone, because we don't have our microphones turned on, I say good day to all of us. And thank you once again, Astrid.
Thank you. Goodbye.